Hi, this is Anton Fig, and we are on Talking Blues.
I noticed that you started playing drums at the age of 4. Whenever I talk to musicians that started that early, it's usually classical musicians who might have started playing the piano or the violin at the age of 3 or 4. In your case, was it something that you started or something your parents had wanted you to do?
No, it's something that I started. I did have a lot of music around me because my mother played piano, and my father had a big classical and jazz collection. So there was a lot of music around me, but I was always just drawn to the drums. And I think I just started banging on pots and pans because when I was 5, a friend of my parents bought me a toy set of drums. And I remember being led downstairs in a blindfold and seeing this little drum kit there. So I was obviously had displayed a huge interest in drumming. I seem to sort of vaguely remember banging on pots and pans at about 4, but I definitely remember getting this drum kit. And then when I was 6, my grandfather bought me, I think, a snare and a bass drum, and every year he added a tom-tom, so that by the time I was about 10, I had a full kit. But so it came pretty much from me. I'm sure it came all from me, but my parents, they certainly, encouraged me to keep doing it.
Right.
I got support, but it was something that I just, it's weird. It's like sometimes I think the drums chose me rather than the other way around. But that sort of sounds a bit pretentious, you know what I mean? But I don't remember ever deciding. I just always did it.
And if you always did you ever question doing it?
No, no, it's no, I always, did it, and I loved music, and it was something that I could do. I don't know how to explain this. It starts getting into things where you get affirmation from it. So is that a reason to do it? Or you start defining your personality as someone who can do this other thing or who does this other thing? I always kind of got into wanting to play music. It wasn't because I wanted to be famous, and it wasn't because, I didn't want to play rock music to, necessarily get more chicks, quote unquote. I always just did it because I absolutely love music. And that was almost my motivating feature. It was the drive. So that's always why I just did it. And I just kind of kept on doing it.
So, I mean, obviously, if you started it, you loved it. But was there a moment where you thought, God, I love doing this? Was that from the very beginning?
I just always did. I always did. And I just wanted to, get better at it. I don't know. It was just something I was always doing. I've always done it. I never really thought about why or what.
And did you think that was it basically to become a rock musician, or could it have been any kind of music?
I think it might have been anything really, because I had this music around me. So in my father's collection, I mean, I would listen to jazz records. I would listen to Latin records. I'd listen to classical records. I would listen to, even at a very young age, James Brown records, and it was all the same. It made no difference to me. It was just all kind of music. I mean, there was some music that I understood better than others. I just loved listening to music.
So, as you were growing up in Cape Town, was it important? I mean, was it necessary for you to actually move out of Cape Town to pursue music? I presume that there's probably a decent music industry in South Africa. Could you have stayed there, or was there a reason why you decided to leave and go to the conservatory?
Right. Well, the music was, we had Paul Simon Graceland record, those backing tracks. There was that kind of music around.
Right.
in South Africa, but there was when I was growing up, the political situation was terrible in those days. They had, with the apartheid regime and all that. So musicians could play together in the homes and at the universities. So that would happen, and I was in quite a few bands in South Africa, in Cape Town,
Right.
where I was. I was in a lot of bands and successful bands, but local. And I always felt that, Cape Town was, because of the apartheid situation, and because of where it was in the world, and there wasn't like internet connections in those days, and I didn't even grow up on TV, but it's like it was far away and cut off, and I felt like I really wanted to come over and hear like the great musicians that were over here. I felt like I wanted to come over and hear more stuff and try and see if I could play overseas, and play with musicians here. And my parents said to me that, they would support me provided I got a degree. And so a friend of mine was going to the New England Conservatory in Boston, and so I applied for it, and I got in. And it was weird. I applied for the jazz department, and I got in. They accepted me into the classical department. I have no idea why. And when I came over, I did both degrees. And at the end, they said, you can have, we can only give you one of them, but you can have whichever one you want. And so I figured, well, I'll take the classical one. But it was a fantastic time because I was playing in the orchestra and in chamber groups and in the big band, the jazz big band, and in small jazz groups, and playing in a lot of different bands out in the clubs at night. So it was a fantastic growing experience, and I got to play with an awful lot of people.
Had you had any training beforehand? Did you take drum lessons? Like, how difficult was it for you to get accepted into the conservatory?
I'm amazed that they accepted me, quite honestly. I had very little training. I'd done a little bit of piano lessons, and I'd studied with a guy from the Cape Town Symphony Orchestra, which was just sort of basic snare drum stuff and a little bit of timpani, and that was it. I was self-taught. I used to go to the some of the local drummers and say, what are the rudiments and how do you hold the sticks and all that, and no one seemed to know those answers. I mean, I just wanted to learn that stuff so badly, and there was no one there to teach it. Like nowadays, you can just look it up on YouTube. I mean, there was nothing. You were just totally isolated and away from everything. In one way, it's good because it forces you to develop your own sound in a way. Like, for example, I thought that say Ginger Baker, I thought he was like hammering away on the drums. He's actually quite a light player, but because we just listened to records and we didn't really see any films, and we definitely didn't see any of it live, you just got like that good recording sound. So that's how I thought like everybody played. And, in a way it helped me kind of, I don't know about it helped, but it changed the way that I approach hitting the drums. I try and be like really fairly hard and consistent because that's how it seemed to me everyone played on recordings.
Could you read music at that point?
I could read it a little bit. A little, because I studied with a guy from the Cape Town Symphony, and so we had to read. But I didn't do anything like too difficult. Then, sort of towards the end, right before I left South Africa, I'd actually applied for the College of Music there, and I'd gotten in. I could read a little bit, but not a lot. And but reading is like a language. You like learn little phrases, and those would be the words, and then you sort of can string them together, and that becomes a sentence. So, and drum music is very kind of like big band, and that it's quite interpretive because they won't be telling you every single note to play like you're reading a sax line or something like that. So you kind of you sort of you see like little figures written on top, and just by looking at them, you kind of know what they sound like, and then you have to set them up and play them, interpret them in a way. So that I learned at school just by playing in the big bands a whole lot.
Wow. Can I ask you about living in apartheid? What
Yeah.
impressions that made on you as a young man growing up in South Africa?
Well, it was weird. It was very strange because people, it just was so terribly unfair. And I was living on the good side of it, but there were millions and millions of people that weren't, and you can't help but feel really like, I guess, guilty. It's just like just totally wrong. I've never been that kind of a human being. Actually, where I grew up in Cape Town, it was a very liberal part of the world, of South Africa, I mean.
Right.
And so, the white in Cape Town were generally, it wasn't like the rest of South Africa where it was like, we hated the Afrikaners, which was like the white government.
Would you have been able to play with a black musician when you were
In
growing up?
the in your home you could, and at the university, and we did. My parents would have parties, and they would have black bands, and I would sit in with them. And there were people that came over, and we would jam. I was in a few bands that was mixed, but it was like really, it was not the norm. It was like something you did kind of under the table, if you know what I mean.
Right. So, what was it like when you decided to like I don't know how much you got outside of South Africa when you were growing up, but what was it like to actually move to Boston to go to attend the conservatory? Like how different a world was that?
I would say that the first year in Boston might have been the hardest year of my life, because even though they speak English, some kind of English in America, it's different to it was different. It's like I came here, you have no the cultural references are all different. You watch a sitcom and you can't understand any of the jokes, because I realized that a joke usually makes reference to something that's already happened. And if you don't have that history, then you can't understand what it's referencing, and then it's not funny. So the sitcoms made no sense to me. We didn't play football. We didn't play baseball. It was like soccer and rugby. And, so it was just very weird. And I basically just put my head down and, did my work at school.
And you're thinking that basically I need to graduate from school to prove to my parents that I want to pursue this as a musician, correct?
Well, I kind of, I wanted to follow it through. I wanted it to be a successful experience. I didn't know where it was going to lead to. I never ever thought of returning home. I thought of finishing school, and basically once I got through that first year, and then things, it changed. It's kind of moved, but I will say that that first year I was in complete survival mode. It was just really, it was very hard. It was a very, very hard year.
Was it hard musically?
Well, you know what? I wanted to study jazz. I'd grown up in South Africa, and I'd heard a lot of different kinds of music. I'd heard the African music, and listened to classical and all that. And then there was the British invasion stuff came over to South Africa, and I was really into that. Obviously, the Beatles and Hendrix, the Stones and Cream and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
But then, like, jazz started moving into like jazz rock, Bitches Brew and all that. And I kind of thought to myself that studying a bit of jazz would make me a better rock drummer, because I would have like learn more different kinds of stuff. And so when I came to Boston, I really wanted to do jazz stuff. And in fact, I stopped playing rock completely, and just I was in the classical program, but I just got into playing jazz. And that's all that I listened to, and that's all I was interested in for, a good 5 years. That's all that I did was jazz, and loved it. But it was a really exciting time because, the the music was crossing over. So I was approaching it from rock going to the jazz side, but there were plenty of jazz guys coming over to the rock side. It was a sort of cross-pollination and a really exciting time.
And by this time, you're thinking, I get out of school, I'm going to be a musician.
I have always kind of felt like as long as, every year gets better, I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing. And so I finished school. I didn't realize in South Africa, people kind of go to the school where they live. Here in America, it's like a rite of passage. You leave home. So in my 5th year, I sort of walked out of the front door and everyone was gone. I had no idea everyone would be gone. And so I stayed in Boston for another year. And then I decided to move down to New York. And I moved down to New York, and I thought at that point it was like, okay, let's see what happens. Let's now I've got to, I'm either going to do this or not. And that's when I started to really go, every year's got to kind of improve slightly. First year in New York was very difficult, and then after a year, I started to. And I remember some more seasoned musician had said to me, "It's going to take you about a year or two before you'll find any work." And then I started to do weddings and bar mitzvahs, and I started to play around, and then I was kind of working a little bit.
Did you have to go to New York? I mean, what made you go to New York instead of staying in Boston?
Oh, I felt like New York was the center. And was like, that's where everybody went. I mean, for many, many decades, it was like the hub of music. It was like the most exciting part of music. It was New York. LA had its sound. Nashville wasn't the kind of as centralized as it is right today. It had its own specific kind of sound. But New York was like, it was very vibrant and immediate and kind of dirty and vital, and it was the kind of music that I was interested in, and I wanted to come down here, and this was like the ultimate kind of testing place for me. And
I would imagine it can't be easy to make a name in a place when you're just a new arrival.
Yeah, well, it's virtually impossible. I mean, but you get in and I would take any gig I could, and I would just start playing around. And you never knew. One thing would lead to another. You'd never know who you would meet at whatever pickup band you were in. You'd meet someone, and that would lead to something else. And I just played in every sort of conceivable situation.
Okay, so when you played at weddings, bar mitzvahs, or whatever, what did you learn from that experience as a musician?
Well, the band was really a good band. They had Billy Drews played saxophone. He plays in the Mel Lewis Orchestra now. Kenny Werner played keyboards. He's like a esteemed jazz musician. We wrote a fantastic book called Effortless Mastery. It's a fantastic book. But he's an incredible jazz piano player. They were like really good musicians. We played, and the band played with impunity. We didn't really care about the situation we were in. We just played the music our way and played hard, and it was great. So I got, I made quite a few connections through that. And plus, the money, like, you play a few of those dates on a weekend, and that money lasts you through the week, carrying your drums on the train and doing all that kind of stuff. But, it's paying the dues and all that. Right. It was totally fine. I loved it, actually.
And what year would this be around?
I would say around 77, somewhere around there.
And so around 77, you also joined a band called Spider.
Right, and that was a band. Those were with two friends of mine who from South Africa. We were in a band in South Africa.
Oh,
and so they came over, and they came down to New York because I was there, and we wanted to form a band in New York, and so we started Spider.
This would have been more of a rock band.
This was a rock band. Also at that time, what happened was people were talking about getting back to their roots. And I thought, my roots are is rock, you know. So I went back at that point. I kind of came out of school, was down in New York for a year, and then I started to get back into rock. And I auditioned for a band. Their drummer had left to join Dylan, and I got that gig. And so then I was kind of starting to move into the rock world. And then we've the Spider. Actually, the band was called Siren, but then we were Spider, and that started. And then a lot of things started to happen. Like, for example, we auditioned a bass player, and the bass player, although he didn't get the gig, he said to me, my friend Ace from Kiss is looking for a drummer for his solo record, and, I can recommend you to him. So, that happened, and I went up and played with Ace and did a bunch of demos with him, and then he asked me to do another bunch of demos, and then he asked me to play on his record. So that's how that happened, completely unexpected and out of nowhere.
Right. So I did want to ask you about Spider, that band also had Holly Knight as
Right.
the singer.
Holly Knight was the keyboard player.
Okay. So she didn't sing?
She sang backgrounds. Amanda Blue was the singer.
Okay. So on that first album, you had, if I'm not mistaken, 2 songs, Change and Better Be Good to Me, which both became hits for other people.
Yeah, they would. I don't know. Better Be Good to Me was definitely on the second record. I can't remember whether Change was on the first or second record.
But how well did the band itself do?
Well, we had a song in the top 40 of our first record, got to about 35. And the week that the record came out, the main guy promoting the record was killed in a car accident the guy from the record company.
Wow.
So the band unfortunately did not make it, but it was a fantastic band. I mean, those records still sound great, and it was a fantastic band. And the one song Better Be Good to Me was a huge hit with Tina Turner, and her version is very similar to our version. It wasn't like she redid it that much. It's very, very similar.
So when you hear that, what goes through your head, knowing that you had performed on the same song, which sounds somewhat similar, and it didn't have the same impact as something that John Waite would do or Tina Turner, or do you even think about that?
Not really. I mean, I wish that Spider had made it, but then my life would have turned out completely differently. I wish it had, but it just didn't go that way. For whatever reason, it just was not meant to go that way.
Right.
Yeah.
And then when you started working with Ace, you also started doing some work with Kiss. So was there ever opportunity for you to join Kiss?
There was after the Ace record did so well, then I did the 2 Kiss records, and I remember Ace, took me out for dinner and asked me if I would be interested in joining the band. And at that point, the Spider song was number 35 on the charts, and I kind of wanted to be in my own band,
Right.
And so I said, I agonized about it for a little while, but I knew that I wasn't going to do it. And then apparently Gene and Paul also felt that Ace and I would be like a team, and maybe too much of a team kind of thing.
Right.
And so then they sort of thought, well, I don't, maybe not, but he definitely asked me, but I knew I wasn't going to do it.
But you did consider it. I mean,
I did consider it. Yeah.
Just imagine how different your life would have been.
Yeah, it would have been completely different. Yeah, it didn't happen, but I don't regret that for a second either.
Right. But by this time now, you're starting to work quite heavily as a session musician as well in New York City.
Yeah, I did. I started to do a lot of stuff. The band, that first rock band that I first joined, that led to me playing with Robert Gordon and Link Ray, and that led me to do. Their producer did Joan Armatrading's "Me, Myself, I" record, so I got to do that. And somehow that kind of led to, I don't know how, Cyndi Lauper's Girls Just Want to Have Fun record, and I did that. And then it sort of led to Mick Jagger and Bob Dylan, and I started to do like all kinds of stuff. And
Yeah.
I'm mentioning the more bigger names. There was a ton of other records that I did along the way as well.
So when it gets to the point where you just become an in-demand drummer for sessions, and obviously when you work with people as big as Dylan or Mick Jagger or have the success that Cyndi Lauper does, how does that affect you? Is it just a job? Is it just a day gig? You go in the studio, do your thing, and you go on to the next one, or do you take pride in the fact that Cyndi Lauper's record did really, really well? Patti Smith's record does
Well,
really well.
when I did Cyndi Lauper's record, she wasn't big, but that made her big. But
Yeah.
yeah, I'm glad. It's great to be part of something successful. When in the case of like playing with the Bob Dylan session was very quick. It was just like I'd done a couple sessions with him, and that was that. It was like in and out kind of thing. Mick Jagger was a few days, but those guys are they're in another league. It's like just another world. And I felt very like flattered that they would want to use me on a recording and play with me. It was fantastic.
Can you articulate that thing that they have that's in a different league? Like, obviously, you must belong in that league if they asked you to play with them.
Well, I don't know about that. I mean, I don't know, but I mean, they have years and years of being at the top of their game and in very rarefied air. You know what I mean? But it's great to be able to play with them. But it's like a certain, I don't know what it is, an attention to detail, a certain drive, a certain consistency, a certain just knowing what's right for them. And it's just like, I don't know. Yeah, it's hard to say. It's
But
hard to say.
But okay, so let me ask you this: what would have made you a great session musician that people would keep calling you?
To me, like, all kinds of music was related. So in that, if you played it and made it feel good, what separated different kinds of music was maybe certain nuances of that style. But the basic ingredient that made all music the same was that it had to feel really good what you were doing, and you had to be pulling in the right direction of the music. And I think that I was comfortable in a lot of playing lots of different kinds of music and sympathetic to what the people needed. I was like kind of supportive, and I don't know.
Right.
You'd have to ask them. But I mean, that's what I try to do was like and I mean, I really got to do that on Letterman shows. Like you start playing with an artist and you can see them like visibly just relax. And because they know, like, you're holding them and they're in good hands and you're not going to kind of let them go. To me, that's like, I think that's what I was able to do in a lot of situations.
So I would presume that your experience in the recording studio and working with so many different types of musicians was probably a really great way to prepare yourself for the Letterman gig.
Yeah, it absolutely was, because the on Letterman, one of the main things was you had to play so many different styles and so many different, different situations, and it wasn't the kind of things where you could just close your eyes and go with the music. I mean, a cue would come out of nowhere, and you'd have to suddenly stop, and you'd be playing a reggae song one day, and the next day, backing up and Tony Bennett one day and Bruce Springsteen another day, and you know what I mean, all different
Yeah,
kinds
yeah.
of things. I think, like, when I think back from like my father's collection, my mother playing piano, I think that prepared me, and just really loving all kinds of music and knowing also. I remember Paul said, a lot of the same repertoire that I know.
And Paul knows a lot.
Yeah, he does. He knows more than me, but he knows. I knew a lot of the songs, a lot of the stuff. So that was one of the, that really helped me.
How did you get that gig? The Letterman show.
I would see Paul in, and I'd say, let me sub on the show, because when Steve Jordan couldn't do it, they would have different subs.
Right.
And he said, oh, you'll get your chance one day. And I never really got the chance. But I did do a couple of albums with him. We did the Joan Armour Trading record. He was on it, and so was Will, and Hiram was on that record. And then Paul and I were also on Paul Butterfield's last record before he passed away.
Right.
And I remember Paul and Will finally came down. I was playing with Robert Gordon, and they came down to watch the show. And I had a feeling they were checking me out. And finally, I got a call from Paul, and he said, Steve can't do the show. It's going to be away for a week. Can you do a week? And so I did one rehearsal, and we did the week. And Paul, actually, after the rehearsal, Paul said, actually, he's going to be away for 2 weeks. So I did 2 weeks on the show. Steve came back, and then he missed another day, and I did another day. And then a few weeks later, Paul said, Steve is going to be leaving the show, and if you want it, we like the way you've subbed, and best of all, and the job's yours.
Wow.
Yeah. So it happened like really, once I finally got the call, it happened very quickly after that.
How did you feel when you got that job?
I was ecstatic. It was fantastic. But, I went into a why me kind of situation for a while.
Oh.
It's like, there's so many great people. How did I end up with it, But, then it took me a while to grow into it. And then I sort of got to the point, well, hey, I'm still here. I haven't been fired yet, so I deserve it. But I think I was the right guy for the job. When I look back on it now, I was able to do everything that needed to be done for that job.
So I wonder, with all the different kinds of musicians that would have come on that show and that you would have to adjust to and to play with and whatever. Actually, let me ask you, how did that usually work? You would go in usually the day of the show early and do a rehearsal with the artist that you would be playing with? Is that correct? And have maybe an hour or two with them?
We would get like a tape, the night before, a day or two before. And so when we came into the show, we would be expected to know the song.
Right.
So that you could basically play it right the first time. Because we wouldn't have more than maybe half an hour with the artist. Okay. Maybe 40 minutes tops, And some artists, you don't want to hammer the song. You don't want to play it too many times because then it's stale by the time you do it for real. So, I remember when we played with Sammy Davis in Las Vegas, he didn't want to do the song. He didn't want to rehearse it at all. He just wanted to play it live. The director of the show insisted on rehearsing it. And so we did it once, and then we did it on the show. And to be honest, the very first time was better than the second. But that's those guys, they just did one take.
Right.
But so we had to come in, we had, expected to know it. And you'd make whatever charts you needed. Sometimes you'd be reading, sometimes it would be your own homemade chart. And so you'd play it a few times, and, they'd get the camera shots and all that, get the sound together. Maybe we'd listen to it. And then we'd go, and that would be it. And then, do the show, and then have to do the song. And to be honest, that was hard because you don't know the song all that well. And then you do the whole show, and then you suddenly got to play the song, and it's got to sound like you've, been on the road and been doing it for the last 6 months, Yeah. So it was definitely a different set of muscles to get together.
I wonder if there's, with all the background that you've had listening to and enjoying and playing music, plus, going to school for music, was there ever an artist that you came across that you were completely challenged by during that time?
Well, I mean, yeah, first of all, when we played with Miles Davis on the show,
no, I guess that.
I mean, that was very intimidating. I was such a major fan of his, and It was so intimidating. But I remember thinking, like, when we actually did the song, I felt like I was it's kind of in the. It was kind of soft, the song, but I felt like I was in the eye of a hurricane, like in the very still part. And the music was kind of happening around me because I said to myself, I didn't come all this way in my life to not do a good job now or get nervous now. And so everything was very still and the music was happening around me, kind of. But it came out really great, and he made us sound like a Miles Davis band. It was very cool.
Wow.
And then afterwards, I hadn't really met him properly, and I went. Marcus took me to his dressing room, and he asked me about South Africa and stuff, and then he said to me, "Well, you got a good feel for them drums," and like to me, that was just the greatest thing that anybody has ever said to me. That coming from Miles Davis, so
For sure.
you know,
Especially somebody who wanted to become a jazz drummer.
yeah, I mean that has just like carried me. That'll that'll carry me forever.
I can see why. And to think that you had 29 years with that show. It's
Yeah, I mean, it's
amazing.
amazing. I mean, we got to play. You know, when you play with the good guys, you know, you play with James Brown and Springsteen, and like we played with some incredible people, and it's just remarkable, that you see why they are who they are. And you asked me before, what is it that they have? I don't know if I can put it in. I don't know if I can put it into words, but they've got something, that's for sure. And to see these people, they still, even years after their, not even, I wouldn't even say their prime, after their youthful time, you know what I mean? They still
Yeah,
had it.
yeah.
They were just more mature, did different things, but they still absolutely had it.
And I don't know if it's the same now, but I remember as I was growing up and watching the Letterman show, which I did a lot of, just the amount of amazing musical moments that happened on that show that I still remember, and oftentimes you were involved in that
No,
because it wasn't just like, okay, you play the song, that's it, but there were some really special moments.
yeah, and it's very weird, but I have like forgotten a lot of it. A lot of it, and I have to, people will show me tapes or send me YouTube, this or that, and I go, man, I don't remember that at all. I can't remember. I don't remember that. I mean, I did over 6,000 shows,
Yeah.
and they do kind of blur into, about 10 shows. So you just can't retain it all. I wish I'd written everything down. I wish I'd written down everyone I'd played with and what song, and I really do. But I'm still finding stuff, and you know what? It's just like it's nice to see.
So throughout the years, how did you improve as a drummer? How did you become a better drummer than the year before?
I don't know. I mean, there's a part of me that thinks I play exactly the same as when I was 6 years old. I don't play much different. I have more. I've been in more situations. I can anticipate stuff that's going to happen better, perhaps, and I have more experience. But it's weird. I don't want to lose that first kind of vital, completely natural thing that I think that's been the thing. That excitement has been more what sustained me.
Hmm. And did the formal education ever get in the way of that?
I don't think so. I don't think so. It's like with many things, it comes out later. It's like being in a lot of the situations were adverse. They were difficult in the beginning.
Right.
And a lot of times just working through things gives you the confidence to know that when you have something difficult to do, you're going to be able to do it. You may not know exactly right at that moment, but eventually you're going to be able to do it. So it's, that I see that overcoming obstacles, and I don't know if that answers the question about formal education, but I think it's a good thing because it helps you. Then you can solve with confidence the next time.
Okay. So speaking of confidence, did you ever lack confidence about your playing?
I'm trying to think how to answer that because there's a part of me that could say all the time, And there's a part of me that thinks, no, I, yes, I think the short answer would probably be yes. I think like when I said about Letterman, like wondering why me, that would be like, that I was, wasn't sure that I was, deserved it or was the right person for it. Even now you listen to people and you go, wow, that what they are doing is just so far beyond what I'll ever be able to do. I kind of wish I actually had a bit more confidence, quite honestly.
But I wonder if that not having all or wishing that makes you a better musician.
It could make you more sympathetic to more not sympathetic, more like sensitive to what's
Yeah.
going on. It's quite possible. There are people that have unbelievable self-confidence that don't play very well because of that. I don't want to be a bull in a china shop either. I think I have like a healthy human dosage of kind of confidence and but also like kind of trying to I sort of got to check up on myself and make sure that like I'm not getting too far ahead of myself.
Right. So when you were with the Letterman show, and nobody probably would have predicted that it would last as long as it did, but in your mind, as long as it was going on, you were happy being there.
I was very happy being there, but it goes through it's like a long arc that you go through. But when Letterman called us into his dressing room about a year before the show ended, and he said, "I just want to tell you guys, I want to tell you guys that I'm going to be leaving. I'm going to be stopping the show, and it'll be about a year, and I'm going to call CBS now." And then that night he announced it to the audience as well. It was almost immediately I was like, "Okay, the show's done." I never gave it another thought. It was like the show's done. I'd been doing Joe Bonamassa's records, and I kind of had a feeling like I was going to be doing that gig next anyway. So I, when the show was done, it was done the last year. I mean, I did it. It was sad, and it was what was really bizarre was like the next day, the whole set was dismantled. I saw a picture of my drums when I left the show. On my video on my website, I got a video right after the last note of people just in a daze walking around the stage. But the next day, everything was dismantled, and it was very much like a death. It was like, you can never put this back together again. It's just been torn apart, like blown apart, and that's the end of it. And I just moved on.
How difficult was it for the last year, knowing that it was coming to an end?
It wasn't, not for me. It wasn't difficult. I was just like, maybe it was time. Maybe I was ready. It was like, I've done this. I've done like all that I can do. I was ready, I think.
Yeah.
It was a fantastic time. I never would leave. I never would have left the show. I would have been there forever. But once that decision had been made for me, I just went along with the decision. So once Letterman said it was it, I just knew the days were numbered, and I was okay with it.
Okay, so during the show, there were moments where you were kind of highlighted, like
Yeah.
you had your little bits. Is that something that? How does something like that happen? Where like you did something where you had to guess the expiration date of things?
I don't,
Is that?
I don't know what Letterman like seemed to take a liking to me.
Yeah.
The writers wrote me into the show. I don't know why. Maybe it was the accent or whatever. They wrote me into the show. I didn't like suddenly start speaking, on my own. They gave me some lines to say, and I just had to, perform them. So it just happened, and it was for a while, and then they stopped doing it. But they did it for a while.
So when you have a gig like that, how does that affect you in that obviously you can't go on the road with any band for an extended period of time? I presume you're still doing session work, but you're limited to the schedule around the show. And just based on the fact that you get to play with the band that you played with or the musical guest that you played with. But tell me about how you adjusted to that different lifestyle being on that show for that many years.
Well, it's like the golden handcuffs, for the trade-off. is, you're home for dinner every night. I walk, it was a 17-minute walk from work. It was a steady pay, it was
Right.
high visibility. I got to play with great people. And you just trade that off with, okay, well, I can't go on the road with these people. And I did get asked. Stevie Winwood asked me to join him. I couldn't do that, and I really wanted to. And there were some little tours I did. Ace wanted me to go with him. I couldn't. I did a short tour with him. There were some people where I would have like a couple of weeks off the show, and I would combine it with taking a week off the show, so I'd get 3 weeks, and I'd go and do some stuff. You couldn't do it. Very often, I would, like on the weekends, I would fly out to California, do as much of a record as I could, fly back, do the show, fly back out there again, do the second half of the record, and I worked like that. But you weigh it up. There were so many good things about Letterman that Letterman was one of maybe 3 or 4 gigs of its kind in the world, or certainly in America, and in my mind, the best one of its kind. So it was a dream, absolute dream gig.
Can I ask you a little about David Letterman?
Yeah.
Like, how close would you have been to him as a band member?
I think I was about as close to a band. Besides Paul, I was as close as you could get. Which Dave is a very private person, and so, but he was definitely really nice to me. He definitely took a liking to me, and there was times when he used to come and play my drums after rehearsal, and he stopped doing that because after he had his heart procedure, he didn't come down to rehearsal anymore.
Right.
But after rehearsal, and so he would sometimes leave a note. He'd write a note on my snare drum, and I would reply. So we'd have these kind of running conversations going on the snare drum, which I have. I have it somewhere. I've got to look for it. I have a couple of those drum heads. But he is a private person, and he just has his tight knit people from the show around him. The band sort of, in general, operated separately from the rest of the show.
Right.
It was the show and the writers and all that stuff and the comedy thing, and then there was the band. And so we were definitely a part of the whole show, but it was different. But I think that we got on really well, and he was very supportive of me all the time.
So, through that band, you also got to do some other very high-profile gigs, like the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame gigs.
Right.
Is it connected to that and also the closing ceremonies at the Olympics?
Right. Yeah, that was all like, the band and Paul got a bunch of those gigs, and that meant that we did it. With the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, I mean, I don't know what they do now, but certainly for about the 18 years that we did it, or 20 years, something like that, that was fantastic as well.
I can imagine. I mean, that's a special night for some very special musicians.
Yeah, it was. Although I'm struck by, there was one year where they had like every famous guitarist up on stage at the same time, and you've never heard such a fucking record in your life. But that was in the days when Bill Graham used to just kind of throw people on stage and pull them off. Then once it went to television, once they started televising it, it became all scripted, because those jams from before were just ragged, thrown together things, which was fantastic. And then it became all, you got to put this person with that person, and you better get a young person so that we improve the audience. I understand it all, why, but it's different now.
Yeah. So are you still doing a lot of session work?
I've been with Joe Bonamassa, so we've been on the road for the last 5 years,
right,
and that's kept me out of town and out of sessions a lot. I have a studio, and with my drums and Pro Tools and all that, and I do sessions for people remotely. Joe does a lot of records all the time and various things, and so I'm doing all those records. I still do session work, but the whole session scene has changed anyway in New York. There was so much more work. There's so much less work now for everybody, but I still do it. But, everything has changed this past year. So we'll see what it's like, when it all goes back to normal.
But how does that happen? Like, do you have agents, or do people just contact
No,
you?
it's just word of mouth.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And so what's it like after being on a TV show in one location for 29 years to be out on the road again? Like, what is
Well,
that like?
it's different. You know, in terms of the music, it's like you're playing a very similar set every night. You know,
Right.
maybe changing a few songs. So the whole arc of that is different. You play the full song, and you play the whole set, and you learn where to pace yourself and where to put your foot on the gas. With Letterman, you never knew what was happening from one song or within one song, even, or from one song to the next, or from one show to the next. This has got the same thing. The band goes through peaks where it's like really fantastic, and then it struggles with some songs you struggle with, then they come right. And it's all about, sort of think of it like a roller coaster, but like a fast moving, but really well oiled. So you turn the corners really nicely, and there's no like heavy jerking going on. You want to make the band just really kind of, like, I don't know how to describe it, glides down and through over the ramps and all that, and it's just really smooth. That's how I kind of picture it.
Right.
So it's a different way of playing, a completely different way of playing from the show. What is very different is the constant traveling. And even though Joe travels on a very high level, we stay at fantastic hotels, and we on like nice sleeper buses. You play the gig and you get on the bus and you go to sleep, and then you wake up and you go into your hotel. We travel really nicely, but it's a lot of work, and it's not in a back of a van all the time, and it's like there's much harder ways of doing it.
Yeah, yeah.
But there's also even easier ways. We don't have private jets and that kind of stuff, but we're out on the road for a big stretches of time, bunch of tours a year, and year after year after year. He really does work a lot. So this year off now has been the first one I've had off for a long. This is the longest I haven't played in 40 years or something.
Yeah, I can imagine. And how
I
have
am
you adjusted to that?
Well, it's weird. It's different. I have been doing stuff in the studio. Fortunately, I actually got a film score that I did, and I'm working on a record for someone right now, and I've had various projects. So I've kept creative, but your chops, it's not the same as when you like hammering away 5 nights a week and you really got your chops fired up.
But was it difficult to get back into the road and do become the road musician or the touring musician after not doing that for so long?
I don't know. I'll have to see.
No, but when you started after the Letterman show.
Oh yeah, no, that was easy. It was kind of because it was all new. I mean, it'd been so long. It'd been 30 years,
Yeah.
and I didn't tour all that. I toured a bit, but not extensively because I was in New York in the studios a lot. Although I did some tours with. We opened for Alice Cooper for a bunch of months, but yeah, I don't know. It's different. I mean, I try and go with the flow as much as possible. It's like this is like this now for whatever reason. It's like this, and try and get into it and make the most of it, and then it'll change and it'll be something else. And I try and sort of have that attitude about everything now.
When you look back at this amazing career, from that young kid who started banging away on things at the age of 4 to all the people you've played with and all the amazing experiences you've had, how do you look back on that journey?
Well, I'm still looking ahead. I'm not looking back yet. However, I would say that I can't quite believe that I've got to play with so many fantastic musicians that I've played with. I've really played with a lot of different people and a lot of fantastic people. I never would have thought that I ever would have done that. And I feel like incredibly grateful and lucky that I got to play with so many wonderful people. That just really does feel amazing.
Wow.
Yeah.
My final question to you, and thank you so much for doing this. What's your relationship with your drums like? Well, how would you describe that relationship?
I I don't even know how to answer that. I'm looking at them right now. I'm looking at the set right now. I'm sitting down in the, you know, I don't know what to say. It's something that I love to do. It's something that I sort of feel like I'm still learning how to play the very first set of drums that I got. I'm still learning just the very first set. That's how I feel all the time. It's like, how do you just play the first drum set? There's so much to learn. There's so much to do on it. There's so much you can do, and there's so much to learn on it. It's at times it's overwhelming, and then times it feels if I could just grab and be able to do a little bit of that at a time, that feels great. There's times when the kid just kicks my ass, and there's times when I feel like I'm driving it down the highway really well. It's a lot of things.
Wow.
Yeah.
Anton, thank you so much for doing this. As I said, I grew up watching Letterman, so I grew up watching you for many, many years, and I was a huge fan. So the chance to sit down and talk to you is a big thrill for me. So thank you so much.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Thank you, and thank you it was a lovely interview, and you asked really great questions.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks.